This is Ross Feingold on the Taiwan Hashtag program, hosted by Storm Media, coming to you from Taipei, Taiwan. Yes, back in Taipei after spending several days in Hong Kong earlier this week and over the past week and weekend, observing the ongoing protests. Right before we recorded this program, Hong Kong's Special Administrative Region Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced the formal withdrawal of the extradition bill that has been the cause of so much protest, and we'll be talking about that momentarily. But first, earlier this week here in Taiwan, President Tsai Ing-wen, after discussing with numerous government agencies, including her national security team, responded to the events in Hong Kong yet again with a number of promises about what Taiwan will do for the protesters in Hong Kong. How can Taiwan assist? In fact, this is not a new topic. It's not a new topic on this show, and it's not a new topic for the government here in Taiwan or for much media discussion, not just in Taiwan, but regionally as well. What is Taiwan's role? What is Taiwan's ability to help the protesters? The most obvious thing is to say we support you. So we've seen a lot of that from President Tsai over the past 3 months. Many messages on Facebook and social media expressing her support for the protesters. We have to be careful here, though, because there's the risk that it turns out to be a little bit like that somewhat cliche thoughts and prayers are with you that we often see when there is a natural disaster or some other man-made disaster around the world, where people take to social media and Twitter and say, we stand with you, our thoughts and prayers are with you. The people of Hong Kong who are protesting probably want more than that, not just from Taiwan, but from global communities. So when they go to Washington, D.C., or they talk to American politicians, they're asking for the United States Congress to pass a bill that is sitting in Congress that would potentially impose sanctions on Hong Kong government officials, something very substantive. But what do they get from Taiwan? They get this way on, we stand with you, we support you. However, when it comes to substantive actions, the challenge for the Taiwan government is there already are many channels for assistance, or at least for people from Hong Kong to come here to Taiwan. There was some count that said it's at least 18 different ways that people from Hong Kong can come and remain and live in Taiwan. That includes the most obvious ones: coming here as a student, coming here to work. Another one is the investment visa program, which is a relatively small amount of money, less than US $200,000, 6 million Taiwan dollars. And a person from Hong Kong can get an investment visa to obtain residency, which after several years they could then even convert to citizenship here in the Republic of China. So are there needs to change any of these channels? It's been a matter of much debate. Well, why don't we just encourage people to use the existing channels? Why should we reform applicable laws or regulations for the sake of the people in Hong Kong who may want to leave Hong Kong? So at least as of now, the government, after a lot of commitment to say, we're going to make some changes, we're going to make it easier, we're going to welcome Hong Kong people who need to flee the protests, we're going to make it easier for them to come here to Taiwan. It turns out there is not a lot of substantive action yet, other than maybe some changes, some adjustments to the regulations regarding students. So if students miss the deadlines to apply for university, for example, maybe there could be some flexibility there. Easy for the government to say, but as somebody who lectures at universities in Taiwan, I can tell you it's not very easy for the bureaucracy at universities to change their deadlines. And then there's the obvious issue, which is it would be unfair to the local students if they were going to change any of these application deadlines or application requirements for foreign students, such as Hong Kong students, and would it disadvantage Taiwan students? This is something that will be a matter of discussion in the coming weeks, subject to whether or not the protests are ongoing. Then there's the other big debate, which is whether or not there should be asylum. So asylum, right now, as we've talked about on previous shows, there is no asylum law in Taiwan. There has been a draft law for refugee and asylum status in Taiwan's legislature, the Legislative Yuan. It's been sitting there for 3 years, but in fact, this draft legislation specifically excludes applicants from Hong Kong, Macau, and China, because typically for anything legal, regulatory related, there are separate laws. Why? Because of the special nature of the relationship between Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, and China. So there is a draft law for refugee and asylum status. It would provide a legal framework to define what the parameters are for awarding refugee or political asylum status to foreigners. That draft bill does not include people from Hong Kong. So what is the result? Well, we'll have to draft another law. So there has been a lot of discussion. Maybe we need to draft a law that would cover people from Hong Kong, or people from Hong Kong, Macau, as well as China. Do people in Taiwan really want to do that? It's actually unclear. I mean, it's easy for politicians to say, yes, we should provide asylum to people from Hong Kong. But does the public really want to do that? I say that's a big question mark, even if morally it's the correct thing to do. How many people would they be letting in? Again, what would the parameters be? Is it enough to say I've been arrested for attending an unauthorized protest, which is why a lot of the 1,000 plus people who've been arrested in Hong Kong over the last few months have been charged with, most of the people have either been charged with attending or organizing an unauthorized event, a public event like a parade that normally would require a permit, or some people have been arrested for carrying weapons, or what the police define as weapons, such as petrol bombs, tear gas, laser pointers, or they've been charged with assaulting a police officer. When the police tried to get them to disperse, the police start to use force, the protesters respond with force, understandably, and then people get arrested and charged with obstruction of justice or resisting arrest and similar charges like that. Would that be a basis to award political asylum? Well, we don't know yet here in Taiwan because there is no legislation, there's no draft. Politicians are probably going to be working on that in the coming days. Will there be enough time to pass something like that in the short few months in this legislative session before the election in January? Again, big question mark. And maybe the need for this will recede if the protests begin to end. Again, another question mark. A few hours before we recorded this program, Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, she announced that the law, the extradition bill, will be formally withdrawn. Will that mollify the protesters? Probably not. So the protests probably will continue. At least technically, she is now saying it's dead. It's not just frozen. It's not withdrawn. It is formally dead. We are not going to ever bring this up again, at least under her government. Obviously, a future chief executive of Hong Kong years from now could try this again. But at least as far as her government is concerned, it's not just withdrawn. It is formally over. It will not be resubmitted to the LegCo, the Legislative Council in Hong Kong. We have to see how the government here in Taiwan reacts. I would expect there will be some statements saying that this was the right thing for Carrie Lam to do. We hope that the society in Hong Kong could reach some kind of consensus moving forward, and that democracy could flourish in Hong Kong, et cetera, et cetera. So probably not much change. So if the protests continue, will the expectations or the intervention of politicians in Taiwan who are seeking a refugee or an asylum law for people from Hong Kong continue? The answer is probably yes. We should be watching for that in the coming days and weeks. Also, big news on the Hong Kong extradition bill protest front was several politicians from Hong Kong, led by one of the more well-known young men, Joshua Wong, were here in Taipei this week. Again, not new. So ever since 2014, in the spring of 2014, Sunflower Movement here in Taiwan, objection to a proposed trade agreement with China. Students and other protesters occupied the Legislative Yuan, Taiwan's parliament, for nearly a month. They also occupied the offices of Taiwan's premier, known as the Executive Yuan, for a shorter period of time. They eventually succeeded in stopping this agreement from being officially approved and implemented. Still hasn't been approved or implemented up until this day. So with that experience in mind, or with that as an example from the spring of 2014, in the fall of 2014, we had the Occupy Central and the Umbrella Movement in Hong Kong. And the issue there was electoral reform, where the protesters did not agree with the proposed electoral reform package that the government in Hong Kong, as well as the central government in Beijing, had proposed for the selection of the chief executive. Understandably, the protesters wanted direct elections and not a candidate handpicked by a small group of people, all with Beijing's approval. However, ultimately, they were unsuccessful. They protested for 79 days, and eventually the protest ended. They didn't get what they want. They all went home. But ever since that period of time, protest leaders, non-government organizations, social movement leaders, from Hong Kong have frequently visited Taiwan. We have freedom of speech here. We allow people from other countries to come here and talk about politics. They could talk about the politics of their home country or home jurisdiction in the case of Hong Kong. So the fact that these leaders were here this week, not new. The fact that they have been here during the course of the ongoing protests in Hong Kong over the last 3 months, again, not new. They have been here before. When they come here, there is a lot of media coverage in Taiwan because, again, here in Taiwan, we're following events in Hong Kong very closely. One of the good things about the meetings this week was it was multi-partisan. What does that mean? The visitors from Hong Kong, the Hong Kong politicians, they met with people from the Democratic Progressive Party, the ruling party, the DPP. They met with people from the New Power Party, the MPP, or former New Power Party members, including legislator Carrie Lam, who were leaders of the Sunflower Movement back in 2014. So these politicians in Taiwan already have longstanding relationships with some of the Hong Kong protest leaders. And the visitors from Hong Kong also met with Kuomintang legislators. Very interesting. Why? Because the Kuomintang is typically considered to have a more accommodating view towards Taiwan's relationship with China. What does that mean for their views on Hong Kong's relationship with China? Well, I wouldn't expect anyone from the Kuomintang to support Hong Kong independence since they don't support Taiwan independence either. So it's a little more subtle position that a Kuomintang legislator would take when meeting these protesters from Hong Kong, as opposed to the positions that the DPP or the NPP might take. But to the credit of both the Hong Kong visitors as well as the Kuomintang legislators, they did meet with these visitors from Hong Kong. Of course, they all call for support for democracy, end to violence from both sides, whether it's the police or the protesters. One of the interesting things about meetings with Kuomintang legislators is that Kuomintang legislators said nice things about the Hong Kong politicians to the extent that the Hong Kong politicians who were here in Taiwan this week said, well, we're not from the party that supports independence for Hong Kong. That's not our position. We still support that Hong Kong is part of China. But the key thing is we want Hong Kong to enjoy what was committed by China under the one country, two systems and the basic law. So that was the message of some of the visitors, including Joshua Wong, when they were meeting with the Kuomintang legislators. And that's probably something where they could have a consensus because the Kuomintang legislators could say, well, yeah, that's fine for you. You could have one country, two systems for Hong Kong, and we hope that all works out very nicely for you. But we don't want that here in Taiwan. And that is another important consensus, that no politicians in Taiwan, with the exception of very small pro-unification political parties, have ever supported one country, two systems. So the DPP or the KMT, long history of not supporting one country, two systems as a model for Taiwan's relationship with China, no matter what Xi Jinping or politicians in China might say. I'm Ross Feingold. You've been watching Taiwan Hashtag on the Storm Media.